Child of Terror, the Juan Fernando Hermosa story. In the early 1990s, as Ecuador grappled with economic turmoil and social unrest, the capital city of Quito became the hunting ground for one of the youngest and most ruthless serial killers in Latin American history. Juan Fernando Hermosa Suárez, known as El Niño del Terror, the Child of Terror, would murder 22 people in just 4 months before his 16th birthday, forever changing how the world viewed juvenile crime and violence. The Ecuador of 1991 was a nation in crisis. Hyperinflation, political instability, and rising crime rates had created a powder keg of social tensions. In Quito's densely populated northern neighborhoods, where poverty and neglect bred desperation, a different kind of monster was about to emerge, one whose youth would make his crimes all the more shocking. Juan Fernando Hermosa Suárez was born on February 28, 1976, in the small city of Clemente Baquerizo in Los Rios province. Placed for adoption at birth, he was taken in by Olivo Hermosa Fonseca and Zoila Amada Suárez Mejia, who brought him to live in a populous neighborhood in northern Quito. The couple, unaware of the darkness they were about to nurture, would give the child their name and a home, but they could not give him peace. Hermosa's adoptive family presented unique challenges for a vulnerable child. His adoptive father, Olivo, traveled frequently to manage properties in the Sucumbíos province, leaving young Juan often alone with his adoptive mother, Zoila, who suffered from both deafness and arthritis. The frequent absence of his father and his mother's physical limitations created an environment where supervision was minimal and emotional connection was strained. As Juan entered his teenage years, the toxic combination of abandonment issues, lack of supervision, and adolescent rage began to manifest in increasingly disturbing ways. At 15, he discovered he was adopted, a revelation that, according to witnesses, sent him into violent rages. Stories emerged of him bringing a dead cat's head to school, claiming it was an expression of his fury at learning the truth about his origins. By age 15, Hermosa had become the leader of a gang of 10 teenagers his own age. They frequented video game shops in Quito's La Marine sector and spent their nights in bars and clubs near the Central University despite being underage. His charisma and complete lack of fear made him a natural leader among disaffected youth seeking direction and belonging. The killing spree that would terrorize Quito began on November 22, 1991. Hermosa and his gang were leaving a discotheque near the Puente del Guambra when they hailed a taxi from the San Remo company. After reaching 10 de Agosto Avenue, one of Quito's main arteries, Hermosa pulled out a 9mm pistol he had obtained from a security guard and shot the driver in the head, killing him instantly. One of his friends drove the vehicle to the southeast of the city where they dumped the body in a gardaraya, a narrow path beside the main road, in the Los Chilos Valley. The body was discovered by police the next day, marking the beginning of a reign of terror that would grip Ecuador's capital for months. Just 1 week later, Hermosa's violence escalated. He visited Charlie, a transgender hairdresser who operated south of the city and regularly styled Hermosa's hair. Charlie invited Hermosa and his gang members to drink at home, but when an argument erupted, Hermosa shot Charlie 5 times before the victim could call for help. The cold-blooded nature of the killing, targeting someone who had shown him kindness, revealed the depths of Hermosa's psychopathy. Over the next 4 months, from November 1991 to January 1992, Hermosa's crimes would total 22 murders. His victims included 8 taxi drivers, 11 members of the LGBTQ+ community, a truck driver and his assistant, and 2 others. All were shot to death with his 9mm pistol, and the crimes occurred almost exclusively during weekends, creating a pattern of terror that paralyzed northern Quito every Friday through Sunday. The systematic targeting of taxi drivers and LGBTQ+ individuals sent shockwaves through these communities. Drivers refused to work weekend shifts, and members of Quito's gay community lived in constant fear. The press dubbed the unknown killer El Niño del Terror, though at the time no one suspected the perpetrator was literally a child. Mayor Fausto Terán Bustillos placed Major Fausto Terán Bustillos in command of a special squad formed by the Grupo de Intervención y Rescate, GIR, of the National Police. The task force was specifically created to investigate the Niño del Terror murders, which had become the most high-profile criminal case in Ecuador's recent history. The breakthrough came when police arrested a group of young criminals attempting a robbery in downtown Quito. Under interrogation, these teenagers revealed crucial information about the identity of the weekend killer. On January 9, 1992, investigators located the Hermosa residence on a street between America and Diguja in northern Quito. At 3 a.m. on January 16, 1992, a heavily armed police contingent surrounded the Hermosa home. The operation began when officers entered through a skylight, but a tactical error alerted Hermosa, who was sleeping in his mother's room. What followed was a fierce 15-minute gun battle that would shock even hardened law enforcement officers. Hermosa opened fire with his 9mm pistol at close range, engaging police in a deadly shootout. When gendarmes on the street began throwing grenades, one explosion brought down a wall of the house, crushing 2 policemen beneath the rubble. In the chaos and gunfire, Hermosa's adoptive mother, Zoila, was shot 11 times and killed. A tragic end to a woman who had tried to care for a child she couldn't control. 15 minutes after the shootout began, Juan Fernando Hermosa was captured while attempting to escape through a back window. Remarkably, despite the intense gun battle, he emerged without a scratch. When 10 agents transferred him to Garcia Moreno prison that morning, they were stunned to discover the truth about Ecuador's most wanted killer. The words that echoed through the prison that day would become legendary in Ecuadorian criminal history. I want to make it clear that my name is Juan Fernando Hermosa Suárez, and that on February 28th, I will be 16 years old. The revelation that the Niño del Terror was literally a child sent shockwaves through Ecuador and beyond. In his statements, Hermosa claimed he had no intent to kill, saying he asked his victims to be quiet and that nothing would happen to them. But when they ignored his warnings, he claimed, he was forced to end their lives. He described being threatened with a .22 caliber revolver and attacked by a taxi driver with a wheel wrench, portraying his murders as acts of self-defense. Hermosa was sentenced to the maximum penalty Ecuadorian law allowed for a minor, 4 years imprisonment at the Virgilio Guerrero Rehabilitation Center. The light sentence sparked outrage among victims' families and highlighted the inadequacy of juvenile justice systems in dealing with extreme violence. Even behind bars, Hermosa's capacity for violence remained undiminished. Within 16 months, he had become a leader among the juvenile inmates. Through his girlfriend Yadira, he managed to smuggle a pistol into the facility. On June 17, 1993, he used this weapon to kill a policeman with 5 shots before escaping with 10 other young inmates. Hermosa fled to Bogotá, Colombia, where he attempted to survive by robbing jewelry stores. However, his distinctive appearance and notorious reputation made him easy to track. Weakened by tonsillitis and constant hunger, he was eventually recaptured and returned to serve the remainder of his sentence. In 1996, after serving his 4-year sentence, Juan Fernando Hermosa was released at age 20. He went to live with his adoptive father in Nueva Loja, Sucumbíos province, hoping perhaps to find the stability that had eluded him throughout his violent adolescence. But for a young man who had lived by violence, peace would prove impossible to achieve. On February 28, 1996, his 20th birthday, Juan Fernando Hermosa's body was discovered on the banks of the Aguarico River. Police investigation revealed that 5 hooded individuals were responsible for his murder. The condition of his body told a story of prolonged torture and revenge. Hermosa's face was so disfigured that identification was only possible through documents in his wallet. His body bore signs of extensive torture, cuts from machetes across his back, bullet wounds throughout his body, and his hands bound with wire. He had been shot in the face multiple times, and the brutality of his death matched the violence he had inflicted on others. The case of Juan Fernando Hermosa fundamentally changed how Ecuador viewed juvenile crime and violence. His story became a cautionary tale about the intersection of adoption trauma, social neglect, and the capacity for evil that can exist in even the youngest individuals. In 2011, the documentary Tras las sombras del Niño del Terror, Behind the Shadows of the Child of Terror, directed by Vladimir and Marco Soasti, brought renewed attention to the case. The film explored not only Hermosa's crimes but also the social conditions that enabled such extreme violence from someone so young. Today, Quito has implemented numerous youth intervention programs aimed at preventing the kind of alienation and violence that created the Niño del Terror. His case remains a stark reminder of what happens when society fails its most vulnerable children. The story of Juan Fernando Hermosa is one of the most disturbing chapters in Latin American criminal history, not because of the number of victims, but because of the age of the perpetrator and the systematic nature of his violence. In just 4 months, between his 15th and 16th birthdays, he murdered 22 people with a calculated coldness that defied his youth. His 22 victims, taxi drivers trying to make a living, members of the LGBTQ+ community seeking acceptance, and ordinary citizens who simply crossed his path, deserved protection from a society that should have recognized the warning signs earlier. Instead, they became casualties of a perfect storm of social neglect, family dysfunction, and individual pathology. The case of El Niño del Terror forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about juvenile violence, the failure of social safety nets, and the devastating consequences when mental health issues go untreated. Hermosa was both perpetrator and victim, a child whose capacity for evil was matched only by society's failure to intervene before it was too late. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of this story is how it ended, with Hermosa's tortured body found on his 20th birthday, a victim of the same kind of violence he had inflicted on others. His death closed a circle of brutality that had begun with his first murder 5 years earlier, serving as a grim reminder that those who live by violence often die by it. If this exploration of one of Latin America's most shocking juvenile crime cases has opened your eyes to the importance of early intervention, mental health services, or youth advocacy programs, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Weird World Wonders. Every click helps us examine the complex factors that create both victims and perpetrators, and ensures that stories like these serve as warnings about the consequences of societal neglect. Because understanding how monsters are made is the first step toward preventing their creation.